This is Rock and Roll English. Real people, real English. Here's your host, Martin Johnston.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Rock and Roll English. Episode number 186, baby. Oh yeah. In today's episode, I have something a bit different for you today, okay? Because I thought, you know what, I've done 186 episodes, but I've never spoken to you about the mission of Rock and Roll English and what I try to do on this podcast, and also my beliefs as a teacher, okay? I was thinking about this, because on these Monday episodes we've had a lot of experts, real experts, not people like Dan the Man, the Hellraiser, Corporal Coma, experts about languages, and they've all given their opinions about it, but I've never given you mine. They often talk and I interview them, but I have never given you my opinion. So that's what we are going to do today. You and me are going to sit in a room and talk about this. Okay, so let's go to that room. Don't worry, I am not going to come on to you. Okay, so there's some rock and roll vocabulary. When you come on to someone, it's when you make a move on them in a sexual way, okay? I'm not interested in that. I just want to sit in a room with you, have a drink and have a chat. So sit down, grab a drink and let's do this. So the first thing I want to say is that, in my opinion, language learning is a process of exploration, okay? You get lost, you're trying to find your destination, you get lost in the woods and you get pretty pissed off, don't you? So when you're pissed off, you're angry and you think, fucking hell, I just want to go home now. This is enough. I'm tired. I just can't do this anymore. And then you keep walking for a little bit and you see something like a waterfall and you just think, fuck, this is amazing. Okay, that's how I see it. Anyway, that's what happens to me. With Italian, I often get lost and I think, fuck, let's just go home. Let's forget this. But then sometimes I will have a 20-minute conversation on the phone and think, fuck, I just spoke for 1 hour in a completely different language. So that's the waterfall, baby. Okay. And that's what I try to do with Rock and Roll English, is show you the waterfall, okay? You might think, well, Martin just speaks to his friends. He's got no idea what he's really doing. That was probably maybe how it started, I must admit. But now I actually do think about these things. I think about them very carefully and think about how I can help you. And that brings me to my mission, which is to make English fun for you, okay? It's as simple as that, to make English fun, which I try to do through stories, okay? We will talk about stories later in the podcast, but my main goal is to make English fun, because scientific studies show that people that do best in English are the people that like it. It's really simple, isn't it? It all comes from motivation. If you're motivated to play the piano, for example, you will do it more and you will play it better in comparison to someone who is being forced to learn how to play the piano by his parents. For example, the Hellraiser was forced when he was a child to play the trumpet, I think it was. And he didn't really do so well with that, mainly because we all laughed at him, sure, which I do feel bad about now. But he obviously wasn't motivated. And it's the same with languages, okay? So I believe my main job as a teacher isn't to teach you, okay? That probably sounds crazy. But when I had Lydia on the podcast, who has a TED talk about learning languages with more than 6 million views. So, she's definitely an expert. She said that you cannot be taught a language, you can only learn one. And I completely agree with that. That may sound a bit strange because I am a teacher and I've just said that I cannot teach you a language. So am I saying that my job is completely worthless? So if something is worthless, it has no value. I'm starting to think it is, I might just give up and kill myself. I'm not sure. But no, I'm joking, obviously, because I don't think that my job is worthless, because I believe my main job is to inspire you, not to teach you, okay? Not to inspire you to change the world, but if you want to do that, that's fine. But that's not my job. It's not that I don't want to inspire you to change the world. It's just that's not what I try to do. I simply try to inspire you to listen to the next podcast, and then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. It's like the boy with the piano. Because if you have listened to many podcasts, if I inspire you to listen to the next one and the next one, you have practiced your English for much longer than the boy that is being forced to learn, like the Hellraiser. You may also think, yes, but just making a podcast isn't helping that much. But I believe listening is the number one most important thing in learning languages, without a doubt. I mean, I say I believe that. It's actually a fact. Babies, for example, learn from listening, don't they? You learned your native language from listening. So did I, and so did everyone, basically. And think about this. There are many people in the world that can speak more than one language and cannot write. Unfortunately, this is the case in poorer parts of the world. It's very common. Writing is really only a new kind of thing, isn't it? So they learn via listening. They learn how to speak different languages via listening. And all language that we produce, so all language that comes out of your mouth or out of your hand if you're writing, is something that we have met. And if we want to remember it well, we need to meet it regularly. So again, on Rock and Roll English, you may hear terms again and again, me saying I was hungover, I threw up, people that are moaning, things like this. You hear them again and again, but by doing so, the neutrons in your brain are making connections, like the cell things in your brain. If you didn't see on Facebook, in the summer, I took a course to become a neuro-language coach. And this is something they taught us, that your brain makes these connections, okay? And so by hearing something many times, those connections become stronger and that language remains in your brain. Anyway, we are getting a bit too technical there, aren't we? And that doesn't sound very inspiring, which is my mission, remember. If I start talking to you about science, you might fall asleep. You might switch off the podcast and you may not listen to the next one, okay? So then I haven't inspired you. But if I start talking about poos, embarrassing stories, that's fun, isn't it? That's just great to listen to. And if you don't like listening to stories about poos and embarrassing stories, you're just a boring person, a boring bastard, I will say. I can say that because I know that's not you. The person listening to this podcast right now, that is not you. And I know that because I know that every person that listens to this podcast has a sense of humour. That for me is one of the great things about this podcast. I often get messages from people that I have never met, I have never heard from, and they insult me, okay? They insult me in a funny way though, like friends do. And they send these messages to me because they know I like a joke too. Just like I know that you like a joke if you listen to this podcast. So you're part of a gang. So there is my mission, to make it fun for you and to inspire you. Just to listen to the next podcast though, not to change the world. That's not my job. That's someone else's job. But going back to the question about whether my job is worthless, okay? Some people think it is. Many people in the world think that teaching languages isn't such a great job. And I mean, financially, it's definitely not a great job. Unfortunately, I am not very rich and it's not really considered in high esteem, is it? So high esteem, like in high regard, let's say. For example, if I tell you I'm a doctor, you would probably say, oh, wow. But if I tell you I teach my native language, you'll probably think, okay, because it's a job that's not considered so important. But I believe languages are liberating culturally, financially, emotionally and helping people like you acquire this asset, let's call it, in my opinion, is worthwhile. So worthwhile, it has a reason to it. There are not many subjects in school that can give you all of that, are there? Not many subjects that can be so useful to you in later life. For example, I remember studying things in maths, all of these crazy formulas when I was young, and I was thinking, when will I ever use this? But if you study languages, then it's very likely there will be a time in your life that you will need it. But speaking about teaching languages in schools, that's something else I want to talk about, because I think there are many problems with language teaching in schools. For example, the role play. Okay, so the role play is when I say, okay, let's just pretend you're in a restaurant. Okay, so you're the waiter, you're the customer. So you have a conversation about this. For me, that's just the worst thing ever. Because for me, languages are personal. Okay, so your experiences, your beliefs, your knowledge, your desires, your emotions, your attitude are all important things. And that's, in my opinion, why we learn languages, because we want to share these things. We want to share our personalities. And when we do that, that's the waterfall, isn't it? If you say something and you make someone laugh in another language, which has happened to me, I remember the first time I did that and I thought, wow, that was amazing. That was the waterfall. So that's what I do when I teach a lesson. I make sure communication is always real. Okay, there has to be, in my opinion, a real reason to communicate, not just, oh, let's just invent a situation that's not real and then talk. So I like to give people actual tasks to do. This is why I don't like the advice that some of the experts on this podcast gave, actually. Many people said, talk to yourself, because then it's extra talking practice in another language. And that may work for some people, okay? That may even work for you. If it does, great. But from my personal experience, I have tried this. It doesn't really work for me, because there's no real task there, is there? There's no actual reason to communicate, and that is not very motivating and is not very inspiring, because communication for me is about meaningful messages. I want to tell you this story, okay, because I want to have an impact on you. I want you to laugh. I want you to feel sorry for me. There is a reason why, basically, I am telling you that story. And as you already know, stories for me, that is communication. There is no better communication than telling stories. We are made for stories. Before everything, before the TV, before smartphones, before the radio, before the theatre, all we had was stories, okay? So when I share stories about poos or embarrassing things that happened to me, I tell you exactly as I would if we were talking to you in the pub. I'd tell you that story just like we were in the pub together. Did you know as well, apparently, according to, I think it was called the American Insider, the website where I saw this, that 65% of communication is stories and gossip. 65, that's 2/3. So if that's what we do all of the time, let's try and learn languages that way, is what I say. And so when I tell stories on this podcast, I obviously tell you real stories about my life. As when you tell stories about yourself, it's much more interesting, isn't it? There's much more emotion involved and everything like that. I was at a dinner party the other night, for example, and I noticed at one point what was happening. One person would share a story, which then reminded another person of a story, and that person would tell the story. Then another person would think of a story. Oh yeah, that's like the time when this happened, and then tell the story. And that's what just keeps happening, because people like to share stories. We are made for stories. And when you tell them, you transmit your personality, your emotions, and all of those other wonderful things. And that's why my online course, which will be out on the 1st of March or at the beginning of March, is very heavily focused on stories. I will give you advice about how to tell an effective story. Then you will do it with me. There will be real speaking, real feedback. Not like these online courses where you just watch a few videos and that's it. There will be actual tasks to do with actual communication, as you learn by doing, don't you? I think everyone can agree with that. No one will ever say, yeah, but you learn everything. You can learn everything by just watching a video. No, you need to actually do something as well. Sure, it helps a lot, but at some point something needs to come out of your mouth as well. The standard teaching model online and everywhere really is present. So the teacher presents you something and then you practice. So then you might do a couple of those gap fill exercises where you have to put in the correct verb, and then you produce it and then you try it as well. But in my course, it will be observe. You observe me doing something, then hypothesize. So you think, how could I do this? You will experiment and then revise, because you will be able to listen to what you have produced, and then you will also have some confirmation, some feedback from me, which is very important as well. You need some guidance to make sure you are walking in the right direction. So if you would like to hear more about my online course and I can give you more information, go to rockandrollenglish.com/episode 186. It's the worst web page in the world, okay? I made this very quickly because this week I haven't had much time. But remember, I am an English teacher, okay? I am not a technician. I don't know how to make websites, but I do know how to inspire people to improve their English, okay? That's my job. I hope you have enjoyed this other podcast, different type of podcast. Don't worry, next week I will be back to talk about stories, about poos, embarrassing stories, and lots of these things, so that you enjoy it and that I can inspire you to listen to the next podcast. Thank you very much for listening. I love you all. I don't often say this. I don't have a chance, do I? But today I'm just feeling a bit emotional. I don't know why. It's just one of those days, okay? Anyway, thank you again for listening, everyone. I will see you all again next week. But in the meantime, just keep on rocking, baby.
Thanks so much for listening to Rock and Roll English. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit rockandrollenglish.com and facebook.com/rockandrollenglish. We'll catch you next time.